Welcome, greetings, salutations. Everyone, yes. Okay, greetings. Well, for those who don't know, I'm Nikichi Taifa, and I convene the Justice Roundtable Assembly. Again, I'm Nikichi Taifa. For those who don't know, I was with the Open Society for 16 years, and in November I branched out on my own, the Taifa Group LLC, but we're still convening the Justice Roundtable. Isn't that phenomenal? This is our new home here at the True Reformer building, historic building here in Washington, D.C. But the Roundtable is a coalition of over 100 organizations working in Washington, primarily on federal criminal justice policy reform issues. And we partnered with the National Network for Justice. Angela Frazier right there, Frazier Giles, is the executive director on that, because we know we can't really do things in Washington unless we're really, really connected with what's going on in the states. And she's very much plugged in to that. So the Roundtable has been around since 2002, was principally responsible, the catalyst, I would say, behind the passage of what ultimately became known as the Second Chance Reentry Bill in 2008, as well as the Fair Sentencing Act, which passed in 2010, which reduced the disparity between crack and powder cocaine. Worked very closely with the United States Sentencing Commission to make sure certain provisions within its guidelines were retroactive. And if it weren't for key groups that sit around this table, principally I would say the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and American Civil Liberties Union, made sure that the passage of the First Step Act around the end of the year included very critical sentencing provisions. If it had not been for the advocacy of key groups around this table, that bill would not have included retroactivity of the Fair Sentencing Act. It would not have included any of the sentencing provisions that we now see where people are walking out. So again, welcome, and we're going to go around the room and see who's here, and we'll go around the table as well. You all will be introduced fully later, but we'll start here, and you can just say who you are and who you're representing. We'll go along.
Hi, I'm Bernita Thompson.
Out of microphones.
Hi, I'm Bernita Thompson. And I'm Garnet Robbins-Bothman, and we're with the Just Future Project.
Good morning, Kanya Bennett with the American Civil Liberties Union.
Good morning, Nicole Porter with the Sentencing Project.
Good morning, Monica Lee with the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
I'm Carlisle Holder, President of Court DC. We just won the federal halfway house contract here in the district.
Chris Scott, Open Society Foundation's Open Society Policy.
John Stannard with the Church of Scientology's National Affairs Office.
Angela Frazier Giles with National Network for Justice.
Charlie Sullivan with CURE.
Kara Gotch with the Sentencing Project.
Michael Collins, Drug Policy Alliance.
I'm not going to be able to get the folks in the back.
LaTanya Tate, Alabama Justice Initiative.
Okay, let's start over here.
Mel Wilson, National.
I didn't see. Okay.
Hi, Victoria Palacio with Legal Action Center.
And if you can talk as loud as you can.
Dewey Pham with the Center for Law and Social Policy.
Again, Mel Wilson, National Association of Social Workers.
Linda Jackson Leslie, the Taifa Group.
Zakia Sankara Jabbar, Racial Justice Now, DMV.
Just pass it.
Lisa Graybill, Southern Poverty Law Center.
Olinda Moy, DC Public Defender Service.
Julia Toro, retired. Queen Karen Garrison, Mommy Activist and Sons radio show.
Beas Balaccini, producer of the 1 in 4 podcast on reentry.
Angela Johnson, Valor Village. Megan Buchanan, Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth.
Roderick Johnson, National LGBT Criminal Justice Working Group.
Good morning, Michael Cox, Black and Pink.
Luba Brandt, Transcending Barriers Atlanta.
Patrice Johnson, NJ Ford, International HIV LGBT Working Group.
Pinky Shear, Freedom Overground, Atlanta, the National LGBT HIV Criminal Justice Working Group.
Robert Soto with the Cyril Project and the National LGBT HIV Criminal Justice Working Group. Morning, Leah Sakala with the Urban Institute Justice Policy Center.
Andre Gray, University Legal Services, Jail and Prison Advocacy.
Shauna Batten, University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security.
Taylor Rohout, Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth.
Mariah Jones, Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth.
Jimena Musa,
National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
Tamara Klosevic, Due Process Institute.
Bates Preisnell, National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers.
Max Capel, Just Future.
Malcolm Young, founder Project New Opportunity and other things.
Judy Green, Justice Strategies.
Alyssa Stryker, Drug Policy Alliance. Talia Gilbert, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law.
Sammy Goldsmith, Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism.
Puneet Jima, Legal Legal.
Catherine Sponable, Community Family Life Services.
Antonia Adelaku, Community Family Life Services.
Annalise Hafer with CURE.
Pauline Sullivan with CURE.
Soheila Colinos, Open Society Foundations.
Lindsay Niles, Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights.
Phil Cornacey, Washington Lawyers Committee.
Marcus Banks, Washington Lawyers Committee. Daryl Thompson, Center for Law and Social Policy.
Nidal Zuhair, Vera Institute of Justice.
Hassan Bashir, Just Leadership USA.
Jose Walter, the Congress Committee on National Legislation, the Quakers.
Charlotte Reesing, American Civil Liberties Union.
Thomas Rashko, Human Rights Watch.
I'm Jacob Schneider from the Center for HIV Law and Policy.
Hey, I'm Julie Mao from the National Immigration Project of National Lawyers Guild. Is there anyone else?
Okay, did we get everyone around the table? Jocelyn, can you introduce yourself?
Just want me to yell?
Yeah, you can just yell.
Jesselyn McCurdy, ACLU.
Okay, and here's Abena, introduce yourself.
Hi, Abena Sini. I am her assistant and public relations manager.
There you go.
Okay, fine. So let's hear who's on the telephone. Can we find out who's on Zoom or how does that work? Maybe not. Well, let's hear the phone first. Is anyone on the phone? We use the telephone as a backup.
George Williams, pass.
Anybody else on the phone? Oh, that's okay.
Yes, hi, David Simpson, Columbia University Justice Scholar.
Oh, welcome. I'm glad that you were able to join from Columbia University, Justice Scholar. Anybody else on the phone? Okay, now what's the situation with Zoom?
I'm looking at Zoom right now. I can tell you the National Trans Bar
Can you talk
Association.
louder?
Yeah. The National Trans Bar Association's on the line. And then I have C. Rob D. Is that Cynthia Robinson? Edward Nicholson, Jamie Argento Rodriguez, M. Brooks. And then there are two numbers, 407-462-6507 and 804-304-147.
We're going to go into our feature presentations right now. We have two primary features. We have probation and parole, and we have civil commitment. We're going to start with probation and parole, and I'm just so very thrilled that LaTanya Tate could make it here from Alabama. I know I was just down there. I got out just before those tornadoes.
Yes. No, we were in the tornado. We were just at the airport.
Yeah, that is true. It was delayed for 5 hours. But I'm especially proud of LaTanya because she's a 2018 Soros Justice Fellow working on this issue as part of her project. She's a retired probation and parole officer, okay? She's a founder, she's an executive director of the Alabama Justice Initiative, and she'll tell you what that organization is all about. But she really knows firsthand the difficulties of re-entry. She has a son who was recently released after 20 years of imprisonment, suffered post-incarceration issues after release on parole. So she's going to talk about that. And we had sent around an article that went out with anyone who received this by email with regard to LaTanya. So LaTanya, for about 8 minutes, if you can kind of share with us your story and share with us your reflection and perspectives on this issue dealing with probation and parole.
Woo. Wow, thank you, Nikichi. I am so honored to be here. As Nikichi said, I am LaTanya Tate. I am the founder and the executive director of Alabama Justice Initiative. I am a retired PO. I can stand gratefully and say, formerly with the Florida Department of Corrections for nearly a decade of service with them. My son, and what brings me to this work is my son was arrested in Alabama at the age of 19 and was charged with robbery 1, which is first-degree robbery with a weapon in Alabama, which carries a sentence of 20 years to life in prison. So he was given a 20-year prison sentence, and what we have in Alabama is he got the low end of the sentence, which is 20 years, split 4 years to serve. So we have what we call split sentencing in Alabama. At that time, during his time when he was sentenced to prison, Alabama's a red state, very conservative, and at that time we had a Republican bench. Thank God now we have a lot of African American judges that are on the bench now that understands progression and how things need to move forward in Alabama. But during my son's incarceration, we were 8 months into being released from prison, his split was revoked. So keep in mind, I'm the only girl, the oldest girl in my family, grew up. We didn't know a whole lot about the criminal justice system. My brothers, probably went to jail for maybe traffic tickets or driving drunk or whatever. But I started to dig deep when my son's split got taken. That put him back on the straight 20 years. The split was off the table. When you do get a split sentence, the judge has jurisdiction, which means the prison reports infractions and the judge can call you back. So that's what happened to him. And it was during that time I was in school and my whole career shifted because I always wanted to be a nurse. So I got my LPN degree in 1995 from Beverly State Community College, and then I ended up getting my bachelor's degree from the University of Phoenix in criminal justice. So the opportunity came for me to get the job with the state of Florida, and I transitioned into probation and parole. So it gave me a wide perspective on what was transpiring in the criminal justice system. It gave me just a broad perspective. But my son the split got taken, and he was we were on straight 20 then. So all of the time was calculated towards the 20 years, and in the state of Alabama, you're eligible for parole after 5 years. So I got this job in Florida, in a little town called Defuniak Springs. A lot of you have traveled to Destin, Florida. That county is called Walton County. So I was the only African-American female in my office that drove from Enterprise, Alabama for nearly a decade, and my coworker was another black guy that drove from Tuskegee, Alabama, but we were the only two African-American. But nobody knew my story. Nobody knew why this black female came in the office trying to shift with the culture in there, because we were known for putting people in jail for testing positive for drugs or, moving without permission or what have we. So I couldn't get with that. So I was, telling my colleagues, why are we jailing these people? And the majority of people that we put in, that were on probation, that were in Florida, they were on for drugs because it's meth, big drug problem there. So I went to my supervisor. I was like, is it any other way, any other alternatives besides putting people in jail for positive drug testing? So what I learned was we had 67 counties in Florida. And we had a judicial preference list. All circuits are broke down into circuits. I was in circuit 1, so we had just one felony judge, and I, was able to see what was his requirements when somebody tested positive for drugs. So it was a technical letter to the judge. So that's what I started doing. Started initiating, and my colleagues was looking at me, what's wrong? Are you crazy? No, I'm not crazy. I just feel that, with probation and parole, it's prison beyond, people are released from prison. It's prison beyond being released out of prison. We set all these tripwires, for these individuals. Well, why are we not getting to the root of what's really transpiring? Being an officer, you have their criminal history. You have a PSI in some cases, where you can dig deep and see what is really transpiring with the individual. So I became the resource officer in my office. I pulled out one of the biggest reentry fairs in 2009 in the state of Florida with over 200 stakeholders. So that mobilized Florida to get, we were leading it towards reentry, but it mobilized, it kicked off some things, in Florida. And I became the liaison for the prison, which I went to the prison and report, and I talked to the ones that were being, released, that were coming out of prison with some form of supervision, because Florida abolished parole. They don't have parole in Florida. And then I became a GED instructor. I started teaching the very people we were locking up in jail in Florida. So my season ran out. It was time for me to go. And I knew that I needed to continue to do this work. And, doing this work and dealing with my son coming out of prison. At that time, my son was in prison. Nobody knew why I was pressing and pushing the way that I was pushing. But I finally, ended up telling my coworker, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because my son is sitting in an Alabama prison. And when he made parole in 2008. We stayed out of prison maybe about 7 years. Came out with some post-incarceration issues. And had I not been in probation and parole and was able to recognize the things that were transpiring, my son came out, he had been smoking drugs in the prison. So my question to the parole board is, when he made parole again, you guys are releasing these individuals that are coming out of prison, and you're putting them back in the community. They're coming back in the community already harmed. And we have parole officers that are running 200 strong caseloads. See, I can speak to this because I'm one of those people that did this job. And when I say that is, we have officers that run, when I say 200 strong, you got officers that are running 200 strong caseloads, active caseloads. And in Florida, we had people that was on parole. You had 3 levels of supervision: max, medium, and minimum. So where I am with all of this is, why are we still supervising people that are minimum people? So at this point, all we're doing now is babysitting. So when you have an officer running a caseload, when you do the numbers and you crunch the numbers at the end of the month, not only are you running 200 active people, but nobody's talking about the absconder files that we have to keep up with. Nobody's talking about the people that are in jail, the people that we have in prison. See, it's numbers, you have to crunch these numbers, because it's codes that we have to put in to satisfy, where's this person? You have to call the prison. Okay, when are they going to be released? You got somebody that's absconded. Somebody may be in D.C. committing crimes. But is it worth you transporting them back to Florida to satisfy this? So the warrant is going to still be there. The warrant will never go away until they actually come back and answer to the warrant. So what I'm pushing now is parole reform. We don't have any reform in Alabama. The only way out of any Alabama prison is either you're going to EOS, which is end of sentence, or you're coming out on parole. So my son is on parole to 2021. So now he's doing exceptionally well. He is married. He has a family, and I call him low leveling now. So we're doing babysitting. So there's no way out for parole but the pardon process, which is a horrible process in Alabama. So what we need to do, we have graduate sanctions when they get in trouble. But why don't we have sanctions to shave off this time to knock them off of parole? So this is the thing that's happening with parole. We got all these tripwires, but nobody's looking at any type of way to, say if you move without permission. But nobody's getting to the core of what is transpiring, because you have demographic information about the person that you're supervising. And most people that we supervise are people that have dropped out of school. Their literacy rate. People are so glad to be on some form of community supervision. And when you instruct these individuals, they say that they understand, but they truly don't understand. So when something happens, like you violate a condition, then the first thing they say, oh, I didn't know. And what we do is we pull out a piece of paper and say, on such and such date, you signed here stating that you understood what I said, which you truly don't understand what I'm saying. So this is what I'm pushing with parole reform, is getting to the root of what is transpiring. Don't continue to lock people up in jail with substance abuse problems. Don't continue to jail people with mental illness problems. Because a probation officer, we're doing all of this with a social worker. We're all of this, but what we're going to start seeing happening is, you're not going to get an officer like me that went into probation in my 40s, that was really concerned about what is transpiring. But what you're going to start seeing, these young people that are coming out of college, that's getting these jobs. I call them renegades, millennium renegades, because they're not going to take the time to find out what is transpiring with an individual. Like I told you,
we're not going to pay everybody with the same broad brush. There's some of millennials, so I'm speaking up for millennials. I'm a millennial.
So here's what's going to happen. When I interview for I always go back to this, when I interview for my Soros Fellowship, and Kishi had the pleasure to be one of the people there. And what I talked about was, you know, what happens is when a person violates their conditions of supervision, for an officer that will not take the time out to really just try to help you, it's called easy case management. That means we're gonna lock you up in jail because we know where you are. So those are the situations that you continue to see happen. So it's easy case management. It means I can get you off my caseload, which really you really not getting them off the caseload because you got them in jail and you still have to monitor the case. So why are we not shifting that thought pattern and say, let me get you into a rehab program. Let me get you some mental illness help. Let me get you into a GED program. Let me get you what you need to succeed in the community. So this is, you know, what I'm driving, and this is what I stand on, and this is what I will say. Thank you, Nikita.
Let's give it up for LaTanya. We're going to hear from our other presenters, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. Thank you so very much for that very illuminating presentation. I would say, I think it was about 42 years ago, I was at a baby naming ceremony, and I did a poem on behalf of a baby that was just born, who was the son of a very dear friend of mine. And Brian Stevenson always talks about when you become proximate to an issue. I'll use the word empathy because yesterday was the day of empathy. You have more empathy, you have more understanding, you have more connectedness, you know. And that baby is now 42 years old and is the son of Dr. Bernita Thompson. Dr. Bernita Thompson, I've known her for quite, oh my God, well, more than 42 years. And I'm only 43 years old. Yeah, I was a baby myself. But she is the founding teacher and principal of the Roots Activity Learning Center here in Washington. My daughter went to the school, and Roots Public Charter School as well. She is just a prolific educator, but all the times we don't know the connectiveness that people have to the issues that we work on each and every day. So Dr. Thompson is going to talk about the connectedness, her connectedness to this very issue, and I'm really glad to be able to bring you on board. And then I'm going to introduce your colleague as well. I'll introduce you now, really, actually, since you're dealing with the same
we're sisters
issue.
Of the same, of different mothers.
Sisters
anyway.
from another mother, yeah, I got you. Garnett Robbins Bauman. For those who've been with the Roundtable for a while, they knew an individual who was part of the Roundtable who actually is your son, Galen. Galen was a very active member of the Justice Roundtable, and he's no longer around the table physically, and his mother, Garnett, who's a very passionate advocate for these issues, will be able to explain why. And then before I just turn over the mic, I just want to say, you know, there are easy issues, what I call the low-hanging fruit, and then there are the more difficult issues, which we call the higher-hanging fruit. And many times, unfortunately, we tend to gravitate more so towards the easy issues because it's easy to deal with them on the Hill. It's easy to get bipartisan, you know, support, you know, etc. But until we really start tackling with these more difficult issues and see that they're not so far removed from people that we know or from our very own situations or people in our family, will never be able to talk about really reducing and cutting and ending mass incarceration. So I thought that these two issues, civil commitment, specifically sex offender, civil commitment, probation and parole, because both of them actually deal with what we ultimately becomes like indefinite detention, indefinite confinement. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bernita Thompson first, and then to Galen Robbins Bauman. Did I do that wrong?
Garnet.
What did I say?
Galen.
Well, I was wishful thinking that Galen would be out to be able to be here. Thank you.
I'm his proxy.
Okay, so let's turn it over to Bernita Thompson. Here we are.
Good morning. You would be surprised how many mothers I have found are in my position. I have a son who grew up, well, when he was born, like Nkechi said, we had a big African naming ceremony. And Nkechi was a teenager then, actually.
I really was.
She really was. And she
I
gave
wasn't
this.
born yet.
And she gave this beautiful poem to him and a beautiful plant. And he grew up at Roots, and then he went on to Nation House, graduated from Nation House. All of these things, went to Florida A&M. But in his 20s, he liked young adolescent girls. That's a no-no. That's called jailbait. And he got snatched up and had to go to jail for that. Well, he was in jail for 8 years, and he was supposed to then, he finished all of his time, come out. The problem was, while he was in jail, the Virginia government passed a law that said if you have a sex offense, they're going to give you this test called the static 99, which is not scientific at all. It's really, subjective. But they give you this, and most of the people that they give this to show that, oh, you ought to be civilly committed because you have a personality disorder. Now, if he didn't have one before he went in jail, how did all of a sudden he get a personality disorder, paraphilia, all of these diagnoses? And then I find out that everybody else's mother, they have the same thing. All of these guys have the same thing. Isn't that mysterious? And so when you get diagnosed as being a sexually violent predator, and there wasn't a violent bone in his body, and you're civilly committed for the rest of your life, there's something is wrong with that picture. Something is very wrong with that picture. He was convicted in 2001. He was in his 20s. He's 42 years old now. He was supposed to come out after 8 years. We fought at the end, when he was supposed to come out, we fought for 3 years while they kept him in prison. It was past his prison time. But he stayed in prison still for 3 more years as we had lawyers and fighting for not being civilly committed. But finally in 2012, he was conditionally released. And the only way that the judge would conditionally release him is he has to say, I am a sexually violent predator.
Wow.
I did not want him to say that. He did not want to say that, but his attorney said, well, that's the only way you're going to come out. So he had to sign, I am, which is not true. So he came out and he did beautifully. The thing is, when you're conditionally released, you can't leave Virginia. So Virginia gets all of your tax dollars. Virginia gets to claim you on their population so that they can have more senators and so on and so forth. And you can't leave. You can't vote. You can't leave. So it's a real problem.
Literally, you can't, can I interrupt? Literally, you can't leave, as in across the river to go for Thanksgiving dinner at your mother's house.
Right. He couldn't come to
the restrictions that they put on you when you have that label are defined, and they're dramatic, and they're lifelong. And they're creating a subclass of humans in the United States. We have our own untouchable class now.
Right. That's right. That's right. So he did well in Virginia. He became the manager of Dunkin' Donut, and for 5 years everything was well. So we said, let's go back to court and get you off of conditionally released so that you can come back home to Washington, D.C. Because as you know, he wasn't a Virginia resident. He was born in D.C. He was raised in D.C. He was a D.C. resident, but he was held hostage in Virginia. So he told his probation officer what we were about to do. The probation officer told the Attorney General. The Attorney General said, find anything you can and just violate his probation. And they did.
Wow.
So when they violated his, that was a horrible thing, but he is civilly committed now. We could have got him out if the Attorney General hadn't just find anything, and violate his probation, okay? So right now, we're fighting to get him out of the civil commitment. And we have an attorney, and we're going to try to also get him off of the SVP label, civil commitment, and get him home to Washington, D.C. And I had a handout, I don't know how many of you did, who needs the handout that I have? And I had it at the front. But the handout says, Martin Luther King said, quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," quote. And today, 20 states hold a total of 5,400 men in an inhumane system of civil commitment.
And the number's growing every day.
It certainly is. So if you don't have this handout, please get it. I'll put it back over there, okay?
Okay, thank you so very much, and we'll make sure we put it on the Justice Roundtable website. Burnett Robbins Bauman.
Hi, and I apologize for reading for notes. I am not a public speaker and I get very nervous. The 20 states, just so that you know in case you're in one of them, is Arizona, California, Florida, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Dakota, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania only civilly commits juveniles that are aging out of the juvenile system. They don't want to let them out into the community, so they civilly commit them with no end date, potentially for the rest of their lives. South Carolina, Texas, Virginia, Washington State, Wisconsin, and in Kichi, we did find out the District of Columbia does have it on their books. We don't know who yet, but we do know that they do. We've started a group, and actually I'm sitting here as proxy for my son. This is the work that my son's been doing while he's been in jail fighting this. They're trying to civilly commit him for the second time with no new crime. He won his jury trial unanimously the first time, but he was a Soros Fellow, 2015 Soros Fellow, Justice Fellow, and he was working his fellowship. He had gotten the warden of ECBR, they call the facilities manager. They had gotten him deposed as part of a case. My son had gone with a group of law firms in the city and convinced them that there actually was a constitutional challenge, at least to what they were doing in Virginia. And so as part of that, with a country lawyer, they had gotten the warden deposed. My son, as part of his fellowship, had also done a TED Talk, a TEDx talk with New York CUNY. And I'm interrupting for a second, but if you go to New York CUNY's TEDx talk and search for it on the internet, they've taken his name off of the system. Talk about dangerous speech. They have taken him out of the system as if he never existed, never did the talk. The talk is on our website. We formed a group and we're going national as quickly and as best as we can. And we're a group of affected families to some degree, but there are others that are joining us now that are not directly affected, that are horrified at what's going on and have become a part of us. And we're doing simple things, grassroots advocacy. One of the things we're doing is actually going to all of the different hearings that we can possibly go to, and we're taking notes. We are finding that the other side has a playbook and the defense doesn't. But we're seeing the same things over and over again, to the point where we're hearing judges reading the same, in sentencing for instance, reading the same sentences. One of them is what we've heard over and over again and can document because we get the transcripts of the hearings. is that I'm sentencing you not for what you have done, but for what you might do in the future. That's un-American. In my book, that's un-American. That is not who we are. That's not who we are as a people. We really, truly are creating an underclass in this country, which we're going to have a very hard time fixing if we don't stop and start paying attention now. Going back to Galen, they found a probation violation, an alleged probation violation. We're still saying alleged. They caught the probation officer lying on the stand, and the judge ignored it. They sentenced Galen to, first of all, he turned himself in. The probation violation, and he was a paragon. Some of you here in this room know him well and still know him. And the organization, the work that we're doing, he's directing. His intern is sitting here, this semester's intern, hi Max, is sitting here in the audience, at 25 cents a minute on the phone with him 3 days a week, pretty much all day. But they've done amazing work. I mean, Galen has since he's been there. So the judge sentenced him that the technical violation they found him guilty of was speaking to a 16-year-old, which he had permission to speak to 16-year-olds, but not to parse that. It carried no jail time. He was there for 8.5 months before the hearing. The judge sentenced him to a year, so that was a year plus 8.5 months, not with time served. And that was it. That triggered and allowed the state to file a sexually violent predator petition against Galen for a second time. The problem is and there are lawyers, a lot of you in the room, and Phil can speak to this, but it's res judicata, I believe is what it's called. It's no new crime. So they're trying him for the same thing twice. They used an assessment tool, so that's algorithmic justice, that is heavily weighted because he's a gay young man. It's a very homophobic tool, and he wouldn't have met the guidelines if they hadn't used that assessment tool. So if he wasn't gay, they wouldn't have been able to file the petition. The state has since gone back and figured that that was a problem. The LGBTQ organizations in this country, a number of them, put together this letter, sent it to the Attorney General. I have a copy of it here. His legal team, which the Lawyers Committee helped us find, or found for Galen, that are representing him. They wrote a letter to the Attorney General, and they've completely ignored both of them, and there was no answer. But anyway, getting back to Galen, he has now spent 20-some months, it'll be 35 months. He was released from his technical violation on November 7th, 2017. Now he's been held past that release date, and he's been in prison for 35 months. It'll be 2 years in April since that time. 3 years, excuse me, thank you, Charlie. It'll be 3 years, it's been a long time. And we're still fighting, but we are going to go to trial. They filed a writ of mandamus and an interlocutory. One of the things that we caught the state doing, and we're catching them in Virginia specifically, but it's translating all across the country, is one of the things they did was they expert shopped. So they got an expert legally hired. The state statute says you have to do it this way. They did. The Attorney General's office hired legally an expert. The expert went in, looked at all the records, talked to Galen briefly. He didn't know they were filing the petition. So he said, you know, at this juncture we need to stop because I need to talk to an attorney. Most of these guys don't know to do that. They don't know that they can get legal representation. They have no idea. They're not told what their rights are. It's not like they're being arrested for the first time. So they have no idea. They don't even know, most of them, what a civil commitment is or what they're actually being evaluated for, and they don't exactly explain it. But in Galen's case, he said, stop, I need to speak to an attorney. I didn't know that this was even possible. I didn't do anything. And the woman said, fine, and she went out. The psychologist wrote her report, turned it into the Attorney General's office. Turns out they didn't tell us, we didn't know. They quietly took that report, gave it to someone else and said, can you do better? And that psychologist is the one who wound up on the witness stand and on the witness list. They didn't give his attorneys the witness list until there was a federal holiday, so the hearing was on a Tuesday. They gave it to them on a Friday.
One more minute.
Sorry, I apologize for going on, and I do that. Long story short, they had expert witness shopped. They had hired someone, given her the other report, had her write an opposite report. We only found out because Galen knew who he had talked to. And the attorneys called him and said, well, the only one on the witness list is this person. He said, I don't know who that is. I talked to this person. Turns out, she had said he's not a sexually violent predator. You can't do this, let him out. So they went and got a different answer so they could file a petition. And we are now trying to shut this down completely all over the country. This has to stop. I'll go back later.
Yeah, thank you so very much. And before we turn to Q&A, and I think the way we'll do Q&A, maybe have folk come to one end of the table and we'll have the microphone so that you can, people on the Zoom will be able to see you as well. But I want to, I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Carlisle Holder, who happens to be in town from Florida for a funeral that occurred a number of days ago. I don't know if you know Walter Ridley passed. He was the head of the D.C. Department of Corrections. We're talking about back in the day.
I know. When I was a child.
Right, okay. But the reason why I asked him to stop by the Justice Roundtable if he could is because there's a very critical issue going on in D.C. Right now, and Mr. Carlisle Holder is going to be the person who's going to bring it all together. He is the owner of the Correctional Management and Communications Group, LLC, but spent most of his professional career with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, including 12 years as the warden of, I think, the largest, well, you can tell us, prison in the country or something along those lines. He's retired now. He could have just rested on his laurels and gone back to Trinidad or Jamaica or wherever, some nice island, etc. But no, he said he really wanted to have something to do with the returning citizens, and particularly in this city. The group that he's with manages a halfway house residential reentry center in Brooklyn, New York, and I have the honor, hopefully, of being able to tour it Friday while I'm in New York for the Columbia Beyond the Bars conference. So, Carla, if you could just say a few words before we open up for Q&A. I saw a lot of connections here. We talked about Florida. We talked about issues with probation and parole and indefinite detention, civil commitment, and like. So what is it that you would bring to D.C. if the contract that you were awarded is allowed to be sustained?
Well, first to begin, good morning to everyone. It's such a privilege and an honor to be afforded this opportunity. Basically, just real quick, I retired about 11 years ago. I was the warden at Coleman Correctional Complex in Florida. And I've always had a passion for making sure that those that was under my care be afforded every opportunity to be successful when they leave at least my prison, I can say that. And about 4 years ago, Walter Ridley connected me with Core Services New York because he knew of my work that I wanted to do in the community. And Core Services run the Federal Halfway House in about 20 other facilities for homeless families in the city of New York. And about 2.5 years, we decided that, well, we've been actually looking all around the country. We bidded for the halfway house contract here in Washington, D.C., and we won. And it's been an uphill battle, if you've been keeping up with all of the intricacies of it, and recognizing that we won because we provide the best services for our returning citizens. And we have demonstrated that consistently in our facility in New York, and we have opened it up for anyone that wanted to go and look for themselves. So we've been entertaining groups. As you heard, the protest was kind of partially won by us and by Hope Villages lost on their petition. They said that the Bureau of Prisons didn't use the lease agreement that we had with the facilities. They said it wasn't binding, and so we're waiting on what's going to happen. Basically, what we say, it's not about Hope Villages and Core DC. It's about who can provide the best services for the returning citizens of the District of Columbia. I know some folks are trying to make it we have a demonstrated record. They have a demonstrated record. Look at both records and then make a determination. So we've been working and trying to educate the community on who Core DC is about and what they would do. There was if you would read the newspaper, they said that we wasn't transparent in our engagement of the community. That's absolutely incorrect. We did so the day that we awarded the contract. We found out, like everyone else, is when they filed a protest, and then there's there's an order to discontinue any work. And so it was never our intent to sneak through the back door and become a provider of these services to the District of Columbia. I think it'd be a disservice if we don't, bring the services in the district. As you know, the contract was, the solicitation was for Montgomery and Prince George's County. But, so, Hope Village has been around for 44 years. And all we want to do, we want it, and we want the opportunity to provide those services here in the district. And thank you for this opportunity.
So thank you. And the Justice Roundtable a couple of years ago did a tour of Hope Village. It was indeed a dog and pony show, and I will say that the pound cake was very good. But beyond that, everybody that I've talked to who have returned to the community and gone through through that facility have named it Hopeless Village. So I think it's a breath of fresh air from all of the things that I've not only heard about you, but even watched years ago when you were president of the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice. I said, and I mentioned you said you were a warden. I'm not used to wardens being real progressive and all like that. I mean, no offense, but I said, okay, wow, okay, I'm really interested. So I'm really glad. I'm looking forward to what the future is going to hold with respect to that. So I want to open it up for Q&A right now. We have LaTanya Tate, who was talking about her personal experiences with probation and parole as a former officer and now working on advocacy on these issues. Dr. Bernita Thompson, whose son is directly and unjustly a part of that system, civilly committed, subject to that, and Garnett Robbins Bauman, also the mother of Galen. So do we have any questions or comments or anything along those lines? Well, this is a first. Okay, wait, Charlie, and then
Nobody has anything. Let me just say this.
And introduce yourself, please.
Probably the best example of how bad
Introduce
it
yourself,
is.
please, Charlie. Say who you are.
Charlie Sullivan with CURE. Is that a federal judge appointed by George W. Bush declared the Minnesota program unconstitutional. He was not upheld on appeal. And the reason why he ruled that it was unconstitutional, because when it started for the last 20 years, and this has been a few years ago, but when it started 20 years ago and then the trial was 20 years after that, they had 700 people in the program, and they never released one. Civil commitment. From civil commitment. Never released one. And so you had a very conservative Republican judge rule that the whole thing is unconstitutional.
They do report some releases, and the report of releases are people that died. They just failed to tell you that in the system. It's on our website. All of this information is on at www.ajustfuture.org.
Can you say that again?
www.ajustfuture.org. JUST. Oh, Sam Corn.
Hi, I'm Samuel Kaplan from Cure, DC. I wanted to mention something to LaTanya Tate. Charlie and I met with somebody from the Federal Probation Office, and we were talking about the things you were talking about. And the issue seems to be the paradigm is that parole and probation does tracking and monitoring, period. And if they change the paradigm to helping people stay out of incarceration, that would probably be we'd probably see better outcomes. One of the things we talked about is using technology such as smartphone. I spoke to a judge from Louisiana, and we also, the federal judge in Oregon, are talking about using smartphones. You can remind people to show up for appointments. You can, they could be looking for a rehab program. You could put an attachment on here to blow into it, and they'll tell you whether you're on on alcohol or whatever. There's lots of things that technology could do that they could get you into a program if you're doing things like that to be helpful. As well as tracking and monitoring. You know, the probation officer doesn't have to show up at your house. He can say, "Where are you?" "I'm at my house." And you can look in the phone and look around my house, and here I am. And besides, my Android phone, with using Google, tells me, I can tell you where I've been every second of every day for the however long I've had this phone. It tracks wherever I go. So if Google could do it, certainly the probation office. And this also could replace the ankle bracelet kind of thing as well. So I mean it needs a paradigm shift to help instead of incarcerate.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hi, first of all, I want to say I really appreciated all the presentations and.
Your name.
Oh, my name?
We don't know you.
She's retired.
I'm a retiree. No, my name is Ajua Toro. I worked for years in this area and still do some work in this area. I just always want to remind people I'm retired because you know what people do. You know, they think, oh, you retired, you can do it all, you know? So anyway, I've had background with ACLU National Prison Project and Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, and in some ways, I've come to one other Justice Roundtable, and for some reason this time I'm even sadder than I was the last time. I've been working in this area, have worked in this area, and you know, I won't try and lie to you that I'm 52, since 1978. And I'm listening to the stories and listening to the continuing problems, and I won't say we've made no progress. That would be putting a damper on all of our work because we work hard. But we have to flip the script because for me, when I was listening to LaTanya and talking about the generation of new parole persons, I don't think they're new. I don't think that attitude is new. That attitude is an attitude that we've dealt with for years, and you have too. That there are a number of parole officers and probation officers who sincerely want to do what's best. I mean, it's sort of like we can't put them all in a class. But when I say flip the script, they look at people in the criminal punishment system like they look at black folk, which a lot of people are black, right? But because they have this stereotype. And so for me, all the work everyone is doing is real important. I'm not saying don't do that work, but we need to figure out how to change. When I look at, it's sort of like we've been working with racism. When I look at you, I don't see that you're no good. When I look at you and you're in prison, I see potential. I don't see the opposite. And that's what they see. Many of them who don't want to take the time, or because they just, he locked up and he's on probation, he violated or she violated it, so we send them back. So to me, somehow we need to add that in training. I'm not saying, to keep, I'm not an in-the-sky person as Nkechi and Charlie and others who know me. I am a practical person. But we've got to figure out how to get involved in the training of parole officers, get involved in the training of probation officers, and add that piece to it so that they begin to see this is a human being, made mistakes, and yet what can I do to help that person see what their opportunities are?
So can I get a feel for how many more have questions or comments? Okay, this is what I want to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's hear all of it, and then let you all, and then we're going to move on to our working group. But, kind of frame it into a question or a short comment.
Sure. My name's Mike with Black and Pink, and I had a question about Galen. What's the status of this interlocutory appeal in the writ?
Wait, don't write that down. Let's go to the next one. Make sure. Okay. Thank you.
Hi.
And introduce yourself. Oh, you did. I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Olinda Moy with the DC Public Defender Service Parole Division. My question is to all of the presenters. There are studies that have been done that talk about the best practices as it relates to parole supervision. Unfortunately, when it boils down to folks who are actually doing the work, they reject these studies. And so my question, I guess, would be to LaTanya, as a former parole and probation officer, how do we do that? Ajwa talked about the importance of training parole officers. What I've seen in the last 30 years that I've been doing this work is parole officers have moved from being social workers and wanting to help people to being law enforcement and wanting to carry weapons and go out with police officers. So how do we change that mindset?
No, keep going.
Hi, I'm Lupa Brandt from Transcending Barriers Atlanta, and I'm part of the National LGBT HIV Criminal Justice Working Group. This one's for LaTanya in particular. I was listening to your comments about the drug use, and the recidivism. Because of that, I just recently cemented a partnership in Atlanta with the Fulton County Accountability Court, or the Drug Court. They actually reached out to our organization, Transcending Barriers, about referring their problem, their trans and GNC individuals to us. And so currently I'm trying to implement something with the pre-arrest diversion initiative we have in Atlanta too, to make like a triad. Is there any possibility that, in your states, in Alabama or wherever, that you could do something similar that might be helpful?
How many more?
It would be helpful if whoever's going to ask.
Hi, good morning. My name is Shauna Batten, and I work at the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. I began my career as a law clerk for Nkechi, working on sentencing disparities and DC statehood. But then I went to work for 15 years in Los Angeles County as a prosecutor. And during much of that time, I was a sex crimes prosecutor. And for part of that time worked on SVP cases. So I definitely have a lot of opinions about that. Mama Bernita and I have spoken at great length about the issues with SVP laws. Definitely there are due process issues. There are discretionary and equity issues tied up with the use of discretion in SVP prosecutions. But, and this is not so much a question as a comment, because even the title SVP is politically lucrative.
Can you say what that is again?
SVP, sexually violent predator. So even though the name of the law is predator, and everything that predator implies and actually is defined as being, the people who are prosecuted under those laws are most frequently not what we would consider to be predators. But the name of the law and the kind of political lucrative nature of this type of law makes it very difficult to defeat on equity, justice, and due process levels. But what I do think is the vulnerable part of these laws is that the prosecutions are based upon, like you said, algorithmic justice. They're based on static 99. And static 99 is really a list of characteristics that a person evaluates the criminal history and the person's current mental health state and comes up with a decision as to whether or not they are an SVP. The way to attack this type of law is to attack the science that it's based on. I'm also a member of the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, and any threat assessment professional will tell you that threat assessments are a tool that should be used as part of a larger judgment scheme. But SVPs are largely reliant upon the calculation that comes up from the static 99. And that is the Achilles heel, and that really should be the focus of our efforts.
Thank you so much, Shauna. Okay, will you grab our last question or comment?
On the screen. My name is Andre Gray. I'm peer navigator for the University of Legal Services. I'm also, first before all that, a returning citizen. So this right here is a pleasure to hear people have an interest towards the prisoners that's in. And more of them knew that y'all was sitting around doing this, it'd probably be a great thing, motivation for them to come out. My question is kind of towards Tanya, right? You know, dealing with probation in DC, which is the CSOSA, and that component similar to your probation thing, that's either parole or whatever. I think that statement that you made, how CSOSA worker or probation workers tend to take their personal opinion and violate people, is a big situation here in the city. So it happened that the cases that were spoken on were sex offense cases, takes a big preference in that. A person can literally say, you know, because of your past, almost to the statement you said somebody made, we're not charging you for your crime, but we're charging you for your future aspects. It becomes a big part. How do we deal with those components inside of the probation system today is my question, and I would like to know.
Okay, great. So I'm going to let our panelists respond, you know, quickly, and as part of your closing remarks, I think you all took notes. I'm going to start right here.
Well, to answer the black and pink gentleman's question, the state Supreme Court has decided that they don't have jurisdiction. There's no clear path for an interlocutory, which means jump ahead. Or a writ of mandamus in the state of Virginia. That's questionable, but that's what they've decided. So they said we have to go to trial. If we win the trial, they're off the hook because we don't have to go, you know, they don't have to decide. If we lose the trial, then Galen will go to VCBR, the Virginia Behavioral Health Hospital, that's actually a shadow prison. And then we will continue fighting. They can reproduce and resubmit the writ at that time, and it won't be an interlocutory, but we'll have to go through the appeal process, which we certainly will do. I have one before I pass it along, another remark. In Virginia, and what actually happened with Mwanda, we're finding it's not the individual parole officers that have, or probation officers rather, they don't have parole in Virginia anymore either, that are violating people. It's actually a top-down, and there is a plan, and we actually have a copy of it from the Director of Behavioral Health that was sent to the governor in 2012, that was their plan for filling the behavioral health center of sexually violent predators between 2012 and 2018. And we're looking now for the new one that has to be out there. And they had an actual plan, and I haven't. And it's disgusting. But what happened to Mwanda was he was working, he had a very good management job. He was doing what he was supposed to do, but finding housing, and my other hat I wear is a real estate agent. And I try to help find housing for these guys. Again, we've made an underclass, they can't find housing. He was renting a room in someone's house. The woman was elderly, she was bipolar, she stopped taking her medication, she called the parole officer and said, or probation, and said, you know, come get him, he can't live here anymore. And so he called and said, listen, it's late, he's at work. He called his boss, I don't have money, but do we have money in the budget? He said, well, we'll have to call Richmond. Very quickly, they called Richmond. It got up to the head of probation and parole, who deals only with sex offenders, and she went back and said, no, pick him up. And he said he hasn't done anything. He's still at work. He doesn't even know. He doesn't have a place to live. Why would I pick him up? She said, pick him up. He's in violation of his probation because he doesn't have a place to live. He came home from work and found a police officer on the front steps with the probation officer, and he was arrested. The fact is, I'm a real estate agent. I'm not a lawyer, but I sit with a lot of real estate lawyers, and I'll tell you, he had a lease and he had paid his rent. He actually did have a place to live, and the state of Virginia violated the law, and the landlord would have had to have moved, not him. But he was held in jail here. He was sent back to Virginia Beach, and he was held in Virginia Beach in solitary confinement for 2 months before he could get before the judge. 2 months. So he went from working and management position to being in solitary confinement.
Okay.
There's something wrong with this.
And we need all of your help, and you can do it very.
Yeah, we have to answer the questions, because they have to go.
Here's the answer to the question. Write down, www.ajustfuture.org. Go on the website, click, take action.
And Galen did that from jail without being able to see it. Right, Max?
Wow. To answer your question, we have a judge, I don't know if you guys were familiar with the two identical twins that were elected to the bench in Alabama, Judge Shantae Owens. She ran a very successfully drug court in Alabama. She's actually been appointed to circuit court now. So the governor is looking to appoint somebody to take the reign for what she did. She's really into reforming any way that she can. We have Task that's in Alabama as well, so I can connect you.
I would love to
Definitely connect you. And for Mr. Sam, I did hear about the situation where they're trying to go to like phones or something that they were looking into, but as I began to study that and to think about how that's going to look and how that's going to happen, is you're putting more pressure, you know, on officers, because they are already saying that, you know, we don't have time. You got somebody running a 200 plus caseload. Where do you find the time to remind somebody that's on supervision that they need to report in? So that's just something that needs to be looked at real closely to remind the individual that they need to report.
Your dentist office does it.
I'm sorry?
Your dentist office does it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed.
The software is there.
I'm not opposed to that, but you know, that's just a situation where we need to, you know, analyze it and look into that. Because again, if you have somebody that's mentally ill, you have somebody that can't read or.
It's not for everybody.
Right. So it's just a situation that has to be analyzed. Because for the gentleman, you do have people that bring their personalities into these jobs. And it's unfortunate, you know, this is what happens. And then when you get into this culture, you know, you're integrated into a brotherhood and a sisterhood. So it's almost like I'm with Jocelyn and Nikichi, we are going to roll together. Unless you have somebody like me saying, I'm not going to roll with you. You know, I'm looking at this from a different perspective. So training has to take place with your local parole, probation agency, and a mind shift has to take place, because as Mother said, we cannot keep looking at individuals as if they're not human beings, as if they're not reintegratable back into society. These people have made a mistake. Who are we to judge? We are here to do a job, and your job is to reintegrate them back into society and look at them as a human being.
Let's give our presenters a big hand.